Join us from the region, and in the studio we have Mr. Teng Jianqun, an expert from the China Institute of International Studies. Kim and Moon are about to meet at the border village of Panmunjom. The summit is to take place on the southern side of the village. The two leaders are expected to discuss the DPRK's nuclear. As you can see with the pictures, they are coming in. Kim is expected to cross the border into South Korea, the first such historic act by a DPRK leader since the Korean War armistice more than 6 decades ago. And according to South Korean officials, President Moon Jae-in and Chairman Kim Jong-un will begin their historic first meeting at the military demarcation line in Panmunjom at 9:30 Friday morning local time, or 00:30 GMT. That's less than 15 minutes from now. And Kim will cross the inter-Korean border on foot, becoming the first DPRK leader to step onto South Korean soil since the 1950 to 1953 Korean War. The two leaders will together walk a short distance from the border to the South Korean venue of their bilateral summit. That is the Peace House, in front of which they will jointly inspect a South Korean honor guard as part of an official welcoming ceremony. For more on that, let's first go to AP senior video journalist Raphael Wober in Pyongyang. Raphael, tell us more about what Pyongyang thinks of this summit. Will it ride on the good momentum between the two sides and really seize this opportunity?
Early this morning, the first news from Pyongyang came out that the DPRK's leader was on the way out of Pyongyang, heading down towards the south for this summit. And it was very interesting for me, waking up early in the morning, to see this coming out of the DPRK's state news agency, a very clear message that some of the details that we've seen coming out of the south, for example, yesterday, now presented here. That's going to go to the population here. We don't expect to see until later in the day, Friday, how the news is going to be handled here, how it will be presented. The television broadcasting here is normally starting at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, so we're minutes away from the time which the state news agency has already announced here, just as everyone knows in the outside world, that the DPRK's leader is supposed to step across the demarcation line and be greeted by his South Korean counterpart and start those meetings. I think also interesting in that state news agency report this morning from the DPRK point of view is that it stated very clearly that the DPRK leader Kim Jong-un is intending to have open-hearted discussions with his South Korean counterpart Moon Jae-in about all issues arising on the Korean peninsula related to peace, prosperity and reconciliation. So this is the third summit between North and South in the past 18 years, going back to 2000. But it's important to remember that this is the first summit of this era of the current DPRK Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un. It's the first time for a summit between the current DPRK leader and his counterpart in the South.
Raphael Wober live for us in Pyongyang. Raphael, thanks so much. Now let's get some analysis from Teng Jianqun. He's a senior fellow at the China Institute of International Studies. Mr. Teng, exhaustive preparations have been made before this summit. Everything planned down to the last detail. What do you make of the atmosphere? Positive, a good mood there?
Yeah, the atmosphere there has been so far so good, especially since early this year. The two leaders from the two Koreas just gave very positive, response to each other, and such preparation under the leadership of the two leaders, I think, will give a very good beginning for the coming summit of the two countries.
If we look at last year, things were so tense on the peninsula that people would think that the two sides would practically be on the brink of war. And now this turnaround from the DPRK has been remarkable, as you said, since the start of the year, with that New Year address from DPRK's Kim Jong-un. What do you think has brought about the change?
Some changes have been taking place since late last year. The two leaders actually just said they would like to sit down to have some dialogue. I think the key element in this regard is the change of the strategy by DPRK. The recently wrapped up conference of the DPRK Labour Party just adopted a new so-called strategic roadmap for the country, from the development of nuclear bomb and missile technologies to the development of its economy and the improvement of the social life. So this is a key element for the for the momentum to have such a contact between the two Koreans. Of course, the United States still gave some positive echo to these exchanges, and I think Donald Trump, though he declared some negative rhetorics in last year, I think this time he would like to have another summit with the Kim Jong-un of DPRK.
What is your take on the seriousness of Pyongyang in its commitments to denuclearize? Because when people hear about all the concessions Pyongyang has made leading up to this summit, including, of course, stopping nuclear and missile tests and the closure of a major nuclear site, some people are happy and optimistic, others are cautious and, concerned about whether it means what it says. Your take on that?
The denuclearization of DPRK should be the final, station for all the parties concerned. At this moment, I think the DPRK leaders just gave a strong political signal to the outside world that the DPRK would like to suspend its development of nuclear and intercontinental ballistic missiles. At this moment, this is a strong positive signal to the outside world. How about the other side? I mean, the United States and ROK echo to this decision. Can the United States and ROK suspend the military drills at the same time? This is actually a bore, already on the U.S. side and ROK side. How can they give a positive response to the signal given by DPRK? I think denuclearization is a very tough job for all the parties concerned, and this should be very serious, and this should be very cautious and be patient in this regard.
Mr. Tim, thank you. I'll come back to you for more later. And let's now go live to our correspondent Jack Barton at the Peace Park. He is near the demilitarized zone. Jack, you're as close as it gets for a journalist to where all the actions are taking place. Tell us more about the atmosphere there and about the two leaders.
Well, we've just had President Moon Jae-in's convoy head past about 15 minutes ago under tight security, even a Black Hawk helicopter hovering overhead and another surveillance helicopter nearby. But that means he's at the joint security area now, and we've heard he's actually at the Peace House, which will act as the summit center. We've also heard that Kim Jong-un has also arrived in the joint security area, and within 10 minutes he should be crossing across that thin concrete demarcation line there in the middle to meet with President Moon. The summit itself doesn't get underway for a little more than an hour from now, but we've just heard from the South Korean government finally some more details on what the DPRK's negotiating position is, and it turns out they do want to keep some of their nukes, so it's not going to be full denuclearization from Pyongyang's perspective. It will be a freeze, or perhaps partial dismantling, but their initial bargaining position at that summit today is going to be that they want to keep the bulk of their existing nuclear weapons. Now, that's going to be tough in terms of then striking a deal that can go forward for a summit between Kim Jong-un and President Donald Trump, who said full denuclearization has to be the precondition. So we're going to have to wait and see how far the talks can progress today, but hopefully some sort of deal can be struck that at least covers intercontinental ballistic missiles, or perhaps the dismantling of ICBMs, which could reach the United States, which might get Donald Trump on board an agreement. But it has been confirmed. We've heard denuclearization for Pyongyang does not mean
Jack, I'm sorry to
giving up
cut you
all
off. We're
nuclear
looking at
weapons.
live pictures coming out of the Panmunjom border village. South Korean President Moon Jae-in stepping towards the line where he will be meeting Kim Jong-un of the DPRK. We do understand that their first meeting will take place. The two leaders will meet at about 9:30 local time, which is about a couple minutes away. Jack, I'm sorry for interrupting you. Please continue.
Yeah, that's right. And when they meet in a few minutes' time, Kim Jong-un will be stepping across that thin demarcation line between those two meeting buildings. But before they head to the Peace House, which will act as the summit centre, that's about 130 metres south of that line, they're first going to inspect a South Korean honour guard. And there's huge meaning in this because it is signifying that the DPRK recognises South Korea as a separate state, and there's a reciprocal element to that. Very different from the two previous summits in which both Koreas essentially saw the other side as illegitimate, and it's why there were no foreign ministers there as well. And this time South Korean foreign minister will be at the meeting, essentially recognising the DPRK as a separate state. So this in itself is sort of a breakthrough that could at least lead to a peace treaty, finally ending the state of war that has existed here since the armistice of 1953, which was essentially just a truce. So the Koreas remain at war. A lot of focus has been put on the denuclearization, but for Koreans this is a really big aspect of these talks, trying to strike this peace deal. And if they can do that, they can start perhaps bringing back some of the big weaponry along the demilitarized zone, giving South Korea and the DPRK a greater sense of security.
Jack, you're absolutely right. The denuclearization issue will remain a key issue for the two sides to talk about and for them to check whether they're on the same page with the level of denuclearization. Our Jack Barton near the DMZ for us. Let's also talk to our correspondent Shane Hom, who is at the media center. Shane, what is the update from there?
And here I'm at the Maze Press Center for this Inter-Korean Summit where thousands of journalists are awaiting for this historic moment to take place. I'll try to keep this short because in just a short while we're watching this live feed happening at the demilitarized zone when DPRK leader Kim Jong-un is expected to make that historic step over that military demarcation line where he will be greeted by South Korean President Moon Jae-in. A handshake is expected there, and then from there the two leaders will walk over to the Peace House where a guest book will be ready to be signed. And then at about 10:30 a.m. local time here, the summit is expected to start. The morning session, the two leaders will break momentarily for a lunch, followed by a tree planting ceremony and an afternoon session. And hopefully the end will conclude with some sort of declaration, possibly called the Panmunjom Declaration. And we know the three agenda items, denuclearization, better inter-Korean ties, and a peace settlement here on the Korean Peninsula are what we are going to expect to be discussed. But just to turn over to what's happening over at the DMZ right now, it looks as if the South Korean delegation has arrived there, and this historic moment is happening very, very soon.
All right, Shane Hom live for us at the media center. Shane, thank you. We are, of course, continuing to monitor those live pictures coming out of the Panmunjom village. It looks like the South Korean delegation is ready there. We are just about 2 minutes away from the scheduled time of meet. There, Kim Jong-un of the DPRK stepping towards the military demarcation line where he will be meeting with South Korean President Moon Jae-in. We do understand that it will be Kim who will be crossing over the line to the South Korean side of the DMZ. That in itself will be significant because the last two summits, one in 2000, the other in 2007, took place in Pyongyang. So this will actually mark the first time a DPRK leader will set foot on South Korean soil. Kim Jong-un there, of course, accompanied by the DPRK delegation, which is made up of defense officials and diplomats. The makeup of that delegation is regarded to also reflect the seriousness of the DPRK's commitments. History will be made right there with that handshake between DPRK leader Kim Jong-un and South Korea's Moon Jae-in. The two leaders are meeting right on schedule at the military demarcation line. If you're just joining us here on CGTN, you're looking at live pictures coming out of the Panmunjom border village, where DPRK leader Kim Jong-un has just met with South Korea's Moon Jae-in. He is crossing over that line into South Korean territory, something very symbolic, very significant on its own. Both leaders look very confident, so there's smiles on their face, posing for pictures. And these will be historic pictures, and Big day for both leaders. Mr. Ten, what do you think? A million things racing through their minds right now when they reflect on how far the two sides have come to this day?
This is a really historic moment for the two countries, for the two leaders. They have already made a great history in the Korean Peninsula, and I'm sure...
And they're crossing the line together, holding hands.
They're smiling always on the way, and they're walking confident. So this is a very important occasion for the two sides to go ahead.
And I think it's safe to say it took efforts from both sides to make this possible today.
Yeah, this is a very good beginning.
The flowers are presented to the two leaders. We do understand they will walk a short distance to a plaza nearby for an official welcoming ceremony in the honor of Kim Jong-un.
Yeah. They're quite relaxed,
I think they are. They look relaxed, relatively relaxed, considering how big this day is and what history is being made here. They will be walking onto the red carpet. And the meeting itself will take place later in the Peace House. That's a building on the south side in the Panmunjom village in the DMZ.
So this is a traditional ceremony for the leaders of the two countries.
Yes, it is. And they have a full day ahead for the two of them. They will first be joined in that welcoming ceremony, which we should expect to see in just a few moments. They will inspect the honor guards, and then they will head to the Peace House for that very crucial meeting, the highlight of the day.
So the tradition, the ceremony is quite a tradition, just in Korean style, and also in the feature of the historic arrangement for the country, for two countries.
Yeah, a lot of things that are happening today, a lot of the details of the summit today actually give a nod to the history and something that both sides share.
So from the very beginning, the two sides have been preparing for the summit, and we both addressed the consensus of the nationality in the Korean Peninsula.
We see the two leaders are walking, talking, making their way in the demilitarized zone, getting ready for that talks, which will be held at the Peace House. That is a building on the south side, which has recently been refurnished and renovated just for this historic summit. You're right, they look, relaxed. They are continuing to talk and to engage.
They have no obstacles on the exchanges of ideas, of the thoughts, and of course on the two countries.
I think it's a big day for Kim Jong-un as well, when he reflects the last two summits, where his father, Kim Jong-il, represented the DPRK and talked with two different South Korean presidents. Those two times, of course, the summits happened in Pyongyang, so a lot for him to think about.
I'm sure he should be thinking a lot about the history, about the future of the two Koreans, and also he would like to give some compromise in every arrangement, for example, reconciliation between the two countries, in history, in the arrangement for the peace and stability in Korean Peninsula.
Absolutely, that is a common goal for the two leaders at this time. This is a welcoming ceremony held on the south side of the DMZ. Kim Jong-un of the DPRK and Moon Jae-in of South Korea are walking down the red carpet. We do understand they will be inspecting together the honor guards as part of the welcoming ceremony before they head to the Peace House for that meeting.
I'm sure the two leaders will be thinking about the common history, of the Korean Peninsula,
Absolutely.
and think about the reunification of the two countries in the future. Of course, that should be a long way to go, but I think reunification should be on the agenda for the two leaders.
And it looks like the inspection of the honor guards is starting now.
So I think the summit will be a turning point for the relations among countries concerned, especially between the two Koreans. And the coming summit between DPRK and the United States will give some positive impact on the future of the Korean Peninsula. And this summit actually laid the foundation for the coming.
Absolutely, this summit actually
yeah.
paves the way
Yeah.
for that summit later when Kim Jong-un meets U.S. President Donald Trump.
Yeah.
We'll see what comes out of this summit today. And the United States, of course, is watching this very closely. And ever since Donald Trump agreed to meet Kim Jong-un of the DPRK, South Korea has been serving a rather intermediate role between the two sides, helping with coordination, carrying messages back and forth. South Korea had a couple months to prepare for this summit today, and I think it's easy to see that it's sparing no efforts to welcome Kim Jong-un, to make him feel welcome on the South Korean territory.
I'm sure after this summit and the previous meeting with our President Xi Jinping, the leader of DPRK, Kim Jong-un, will be more confident in dealing with any leaders in the world, including the U.S. President Donald Trump. So this is actually foundation or very good beginning for the leader of DPRK to have more broad vision toward the outside world and to share the achievements or the of the current international.
Jong-un is the first DPRK leader to inspect the South Korean honor guards there. Kim is meeting and shaking hands with Moon Jae-in's delegation. We see Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa there, and Moon Jae-in's delegation includes, of course, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Defense and Unification there, and Kim Jong-un is meeting and shaking hands with each and every one of them. You were talking about his confidence, and some might argue his boosted confidence is one of the key reasons this has been made possible between the two sides. His confidence that the DPRK is now stronger with his claim that the nuclear program has been finished and that he should be treated as, the leader of a country, not just a secretive, isolated state in the world. He deserves a seat at the table, and he deserves to be treated as an equal.
So on the other side, I think Moon Jae-in will give some more confidence to Kim Jong-un. In decades, the DPRK leaders have been worried about the security, their safety. But this time, I'm sure Kim Jong-un will give such a commitment to DPRK to ensure the security and the safety of the country, of the government, of Kim's family. So this is another side of the summit that we'll give to the leaders.
It is highly expected that this issue will come up in their talks, and probably even in previous talks leading up to the summit today. And we see the two leaders constantly engaging in conversations, as now Kim Jong-un seems to be introduce his delegation to President Moon there. They each lead a delegation of their own made up of high-ranking officials. to this summit.
Yeah. Almost all the senior leaders, officials from DPRK, joined the delegation. This is another side for the DPRK to have such a summit with ROK, and just to show the importance to the meeting, to the summit.
And a group photo that will go down history as a historic one. Very symbolic of the possible unification on the Korean Peninsula.
I'm sure tomorrow, today, this piece of news should be the headlines for all the newspapers in the world.
It's making headlines, top stories all over the world. I'm sure a lot of people on both sides are watching this. And we should point out that this is the first time that part of the summit is broadcast live, something that the previous two summits didn't have.
So they're very confident, they're very relaxed.
Yeah, they are. I think under the circumstances, both of them look very confident and they are relaxed in their conversation, in their body language. Both leaders taking strides towards supposedly the next venue.
So I think such an event should come maybe 20 or 10 years ago, and after Kim Jong-il paid a visit to China. He initiated a round of reform and open up of DPRK, but suddenly he passed away, and at least in the past 5 years, Kim Jong's main effort was focused on the consolidation of his power, his government, and so far so good. I think succeeded in the consolidation of his authority and his power, and this gave another foundation for him to go abroad.
It looks like the two leaders are walking inside. We do know that their meeting will actually take place inside the Peace House, which has been renovated and refurnished for this meeting. Let's get more updates from our Shane Hom, who is live for us at the Media Center. Shane, the two leaders have just entered, I suppose, the Peace House and getting ready for that meeting. They're signing what looks like a guest book. What more can you tell us?
That's exactly correct. DPRK leader is currently signing that guest book within the Peace House at the moment as South Korean President Moon Jae-in looks on. Of course, the DPRK leader is the guest here in this situation, so that's why we see him as the visiting head of state signing this guest book. But just to describe the reaction here at the main press center where I'm located, when that historic moment took place, when DPRK leader Kim Jong-un first stepped out of the DPRK side building, Panmunjom building, there was a collective murmur here, and then and a gasp, and then I'm not sure if you can hear this, but there's a lot of improvisation that is happening right now during this situation, and there's a reaction with applause here by journalists, local and overseas journalists. My mind was after DPRK leader Kim Jong-un stepped over, we saw the two leaders step back over onto the DPRK side momentarily for some pictures, and now what you're seeing is they're observing a mural that has been placed there, and that's a very significant mural in Korean history. It's thought to be the Mount Paekju, which is a symbol, the tallest mountain here in Korea. But shortly what you're going to expect is the two leaders begin that meeting at about 10:30 a.m. shortly, and we'll have more details from the Mace Press Center as they come.
Shane Hong. Thank you. And as Shane mentioned, a lot of the layout in the Peace House, a lot of the furniture in the Peace House actually bear symbolic meanings. They give a nod to the history and the culture of the peninsula. We'll be talking about that in just a moment. And our Raphael Wober is also live for us in Pyongyang. Raphael, what do you have for us? Raphael, are you with us? Looks like we do not have Raphael Wober, which in our program. So both leaders have now
in the declaration. For them, just the painting on the wall is actually we call Jong, and it's a mountain just on the DMZ. So it's a very important mountain for countries, just to show the unification of the two sides, and they would like to share the common mountain. So it's a very specific arrangement. Every arrangement in the summit in a very specific, detailed position.
Well, thank you so much for that insight. And Kim Jong-un announced he was actually suspending nuclear testing earlier this month, shifting the country's focus to economic development. And Kim said the DPRK will pursue a favorable international environment for economic development, including the lifting of trade, of financial and energy sanctions. And to achieve that, Kim said the country would seek close contact and active dialogue with neighboring countries and the international community. The announcement followed his meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing last month. She praised Kim's efforts in developing the DPRK's economy and improving the people's well-being in recent years. Now let's try again to cross over to AP's Raphael Wober in Pyongyang. Raphael, the two leaders are now inside the Peace House. What more can you tell us?
This is really an exciting moment here in Korea. I've been here for many years and I've seen the previous summits in 2007 and 2000. This time this is really exciting, first of all, because it's a first summit for the new Korean leader, new since 2012, that time when the current supreme leader of the DPRK, Kim Jong-un, took over. It's the first time for him to meet his counterpart in the south, and also it's really being handled differently here. I have to say that it's a very sensitive moment in the build-up to this. Certainly here in Pyongyang, the sense is that it's very sensitive, all of the developments that have happened since the beginning of the year. People here in Pyongyang are being given the message that all of this reconciliation, all of this process on the Korean peninsula has been led by their Korean leader, DPRK Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un, and starting with his New Year's address here when he said that DPRK would take part in the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, and all of this process has started since then. That's the message that people get here. But an early morning announcement from the DPRK state news agency saying that Kim Jong-un had left Pyongyang, heading down to the Panmunjom area, the demilitarized zone, for this summit meeting, and giving some of the details for the first time here in Pyongyang that the outside world has heard yesterday and before. So it's not clear yet how the DPRK here, the state media, is going to present this. We haven't seen yet how any images or other kinds of accounts of the meeting will come out. It might not be until late today or until tomorrow, but I think that it's really an exciting in the past.
AP's video journalist Raphael Wober there monitoring the situation in Pyongyang. Raphael, thank you. Let's also go live to our correspondent Guan Yang, who is now in Dandong bordering the DPRK. Guan Yang, tell us more on the situation in the DPRK when it comes to living there under UN sanctions, coping with the sanctions, and what are the DPRK people's expectations of the summit?
Hello, Jong. The historical talks between the leaders from DPRK and South Korea are taking place at Panmunjom today. Here in Dandong, a Chinese city bordering the DPRK, it has long been the forefront on the border in terms of trade volume and the people-to-people exchanges between China and the DPRK. But in the past several years, the economy in the border areas has been hit hard by the strict sanctions since China has been firm in fulfilling its duty as a permanent member of the UN Security Council. From coal, mineral and seafood imports, the shutdowns of DPRK's business entities, to the exports of numerous items which could be used to develop nuclear weapons. It seems like the business here in Dandong, as well as in the border areas, have run out of options as tensions grew on the Korean peninsula. But all those worries and concerns might start fading away, as we have heard the announcement last Saturday that DPRK declared the determination of nuclear tests and intercontinental ballistic. And the people here in the border areas do believe that the situation is moving towards a very positive direction. For now, people here are expecting the best results from today's talks, as well as the possible U.S.-DPRK summit. Because after years of sanctions imposed on China's neighbor, like I said, Dandong isn't the kind of bustling cross-border trade hub it used to be. Zhongshi.
CGTN's Guanyang live for us in Guangdong. That's a Chinese city in China's northeast bordering the DPRK. Guanyang, thank you. Let's also turn to our reporter Meng Qingsheng in Beijing. Qingsheng, what is China's attitude towards the DPRK's decision to develop its economy? And can you tell us more on China's stance on the nuclear issue?
Well, Zhongshi, China welcomed the DPRK's announcement last week that it was suspending nuclear tests and shift its policy toward economic construction. Chinese foreign military spokesman Lu Kang said China believes the decision will help ease the situation and promote the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and a political settlement to resolve the issue. He added that a nuclear-free peninsula and lasting peace in the region are in the common interests of the people and are the common wish of the international community. On Pyongyang's policy shift toward economic construction, Lu Kang said China hopes the DPRK will continue to achieve results in its economic development and improve its people's living standards. He said China supports efforts by the DPRK and the parties involved to resolve their concerns through dialogue and consultation, and China will continue to play an active role in this regard. The foreign ministry has also commented on the possibility of a peace treaty between Seoul and Pyongyang. Foreign ministry spokesperson Hua Chunying said China supports the goal of a peace treaty and efforts to establish a peace mechanism for the peninsula. China said that it believes the progress in denuclearization and establishing a peace regime is an effective way to fundamentally resolve the Korean Peninsula issue. 周时
Our Meng Qingsheng live for us in Beijing. Qingsheng, thank you so much. Let's go back to our studio guest, Mr. Teng Juanqun here in our Beijing studio. Let's talk about what happened in the past half hour. It happened but the messages were very strong. The atmosphere, the mood was very positive. The two leaders seemed very friendly towards each other. They were constantly engaging in conversations. They were holding hands. They shook hands. They stepped back to the DPRK side of the border for a moment, then stepped back into the south side. What do you make of what has happened in the last half hour?
I think this is a very important step by the two leaders from DPRK and from ROK. The two sides would give more reconciliation in the future, and of course we have a good in this by the arrangement, and everything so far has been so good. So I think they should have a fruitful meeting today.
Things are off to a good start. But things could get tricky when they get down to business at the table. They are now inside the P, getting ready for the meeting, which will take place at about 10:30 a.m. local time, which is about half an hour from now. Negotiations. Will things get tough?
Yeah, I think actually the agenda has been discussed many times by the two sides, and the arrangement by the DPRK and ROK will give a very detailed agenda for the two leaders to talk about. I think, to my understanding, I talked to some scholars from ROK, and they said Moon Jae-in at this moment would like to have more, insensitive topics, including the people-to-people exchanges and the reunion of the relatives in two Koreans, and they would like to maintain the momentum for such good exchanges at the very beginning, and the denuclearization may be on the final page of the agenda. So I think at the very beginning, they should have some fruitful achievements or some consensus in dealing with the issues in Korean Peninsula.
On a very technical level, though, how will these negotiations proceed? Were the details already hammered out by those working level meetings leading up to this summit, or will the two very specific details of what either side wants.
I'm sure the functional agencies from the two countries will give detailed arrangement on the agenda for the two leaders to sit down to talk about and improvement to such an agenda. Any fruitful achievements by such a summit. So I think everything on the agenda should be very good for the two leaders to sit down to have a face-to-face dialogue.
Mr. Jong, thank you very much. The United States is naturally watching between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump may take place in Washington, D.C. with the U.S. perspectives on this summit. Mike?
You're absolutely right, Jong. What happens in Panmunjom is a big influence on a proposed meeting between Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump. CGTN's White House correspondent Nathan King is joining us with more on that. Nathan, Trump says this may happen.
He also says it may not happen at all. If you listen to him, it may not happen. Still, the closer we get to the sort of May, early June, reasons they're waiting for what we're seeing today, isn't it? The meeting between the two Koreas and what is coming out of it. Will there be a movement towards a peace treaty? What does denuclearization? Mike Pompeo, when he went over there during that April 1st trip when he was CIA director, now of course he's Secretary of State. I just want to bring you some breaking news here from the White House, Mike. We just got a statement issued by the press secretary here, who obviously they've been watching what's been going on there. On the occasion of the Republic of Korea President Moon Jae-in's historic meeting with Kim Jong-un, it says, "We wish the Korean people well." It goes on to say, "We are hopeful that these talks will achieve progress towards a future of peace, prosperity for the entire Korean peninsula. The United States," and here's the important bit, "appreciates the close coordination with our ally, the Republic of Korea, and looks forward to continuing robust discussions in preparation for the planned meeting between President Donald J. Trump and Kim Jong-un in the coming weeks." So that statement, which I just got, says it is coming in the coming weeks. And you heard robust sanctions and diplomatic pressure and, of course, rhetoric, threatening military strikes will continue until something is done. But it's a welcoming statement and heaping praise on President Moon Jae-in and also stressing the closeness of the alliance, which will become very important if it starts coming down to which weapons get decommissioned and which ones don't.
And Nathan, how about the preparations going on for the summit between Kim and Trump? What do we know about those?
Well, we don't have a where and we don't have a when. We talked about the when. The where is important, and especially if we've just seen that amazing scene. I mean, anyone who's watched summits like you and I have for years and decades, that was pretty amazing, right? Especially the South Korean military, schism, that must have had an effect on US President Trump. Could it be in the same location? Maybe he wants it somewhere else. Could it be in Pyongyang? We've heard Mongolia, we've heard Beijing, we've heard Europe, Switzerland, Sweden. We're all waiting because obviously we want to make preparations to cover it. But I think everything is on hold until they know particularly what is happening. We do know that there are diplomats in the region. Secretary of State, as of Thursday here, Mike Pompeo, who had been there. And they actually released the pictures of Mike Pompeo's historic visit to Pyongyang as this ceremony was about to get underway, stressing perhaps that the US, of course, is very much involved and very much the next summit, which, of course, is vital if we are going to see peace on the Korean Peninsula, but also the deleveraging of the threat level that we saw ratchet up over 2017.
Nathan, thanks so much. I'm joined now by Dennis Wilder. He served as a senior director for East Asian Affairs for the Bush administration. He's now a senior fellow and professor at Georgetown University. Well, let's start where he finished. If you're a betting man, you're betting on Mongolia?
I bet on Mongolia because, number one, holding it in either South Korea or in China has a lot of complications to it. It's making a choice between the Chinese and the South Koreans. I don't think either the United States or North Korea wants to do that. Now, if Kim comes through with enough before this summit, I think the president would go to Pyongyang. What do I mean by enough? Let's say, for example, that Kim announces that the international inspectors, the IAEA, can go in and see that the nuclear site of testing has actually been shut down. If Kim were to take some sort of bold step like that, I think Trump would consider going to Pyongyang, much as Nixon went to Beijing. I think the reason the White House is holding back is how good a deal is available. If the deal is one where real denuclearization steps are possible, I think the president would go to Pyongyang. I think he'd pick another location.
It's interesting. You obviously have watched a lot of this sort of thing. I mean, we saw Saudi Arabia. We saw his trip to Beijing.
Right.
He likes a flourish.
He does.
And
he'd probably like to go to Pyongyang.
And when I was just saying,
Right.
he must be watching this and saying, I wouldn't mind something like that. Because, I mean,
Exactly.
both you and I were watching this.
Right.
Very, very impressive, the pomp and
Very.
ceremony going on.
And you can tell this is a moment that the whole world is watching. This is not just about Northeast Asia or just about the two Koreas. Political alignments of the world and how we're going to deal with a problem that we've had since 1953. So this is in Trump's term huge. And in that sense, I think he'd want to go to Pyongyang.
Well, and you've been on the organizing of big events like
absolutely.
this. You know how much goes into it. I mean, it goes down to the most finite,
Right.
most minute, and things can still go wrong.
Right.
Talk to me about watching this. What was going through your mind? Because you know all the mechanics
Yeah.
that goes into something like this.
Well, we call it the tick-tock. And the tick-tock on a visit is terribly close coordination. Every moment of what you saw there, from the little children to the desk where they sign, is all choreographed to the nth degree. You want to make sure that every moment and every shot makes both men look historic. That's your goal. Your goal is to set up something that the world will sort of takes your breath away. And you saw it with the traditional dress of the South Korean soldiers, the flags, the red carpets, all of this designed to send to the world a message that this is, and I have to give the South Koreans great credit for that choreography. I've never seen it done as well as that was.
It's big. It's really big. It's almost like the Olympics opening ceremony.
It is.
Big.
It is.
But doesn't that put pressure on the ending, the conclusion? Too, and undoubtedly there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes to lay out what can we expect to be achieved.
I think there will be some sort of joint statement at the end of all of this. It's probably, frankly, already worked. Having worked on these things, I can tell you that the staffs have been up probably for the last 5 or 6 nights negotiating that document. While there may be some finishing touches today put on that document, there are a couple of issues that either side is a little concerned about, and the verbiage and the language has to be perfect. But in general, they've come to, and now it's just putting the finishing touches on it. But you understand that in this case, every word in that document is going to be gone over by every expert on the Korean situation. And it's going to be gone over not only in English, but in Korean, and people are going to argue about the phrasing and the words chosen to describe things. I mean, this document will be really studied very, very closely. And of course, here in Washington, the key will be the question of how the North talks about denuclearization in that document.
And I know somebody who will be looking at it word by word. It'll be you.
Yeah.
Talk to us about the role China's played in all of this.
I think that China deserves an enormous amount of credit for what we have seen. Until China really signed on to the maximum pressure program last November, we really weren't making much headway with the North Koreans. But once the Chinese decided that they really needed to rein in the North and particularly after the last nuclear test. The Chinese took away the refined petroleum exports to North Korea. In fact, if you look at the statistics, the last 6 no sales of refined petroleum to the North Koreans. That doesn't hurt the ordinary North Korean, but it does hurt the North Korean military. And I think China has very cleverly maneuvered and convinced him that he would take a little different path. So I think the Chinese have had a very positive role in this process. I hope that continues to be the case. Obviously, they're watching this just as closely as we are here in Washington. They will want a readout from their North Korean neighbor. They'll want a readout from the South Koreans. And of course, they'll be watching to see the reaction, the tweet from President Trump, which I imagine we can expect tomorrow morning.
Let me ask you about Moon Jae-in, because he is in really position, because he's really got to thread the needle. He's got to have these talks.
Right.
He's got to have a deliverable, but yet he still has to deal with President Xi Jinping in China, Shinzo Abe in Japan, and more, of course, the U.S. president. That's not easy, is it?
It isn't. The coordination has been extensive. You will notice that the National Security Advisor of South Korea was actually here on Wednesday to see John Bolton. So he came over to make sure that at the last minute, before this meeting occurred, the United States and South Korea were working off the same playbook. That shows you just how important it is to the South Koreans to make sure that Washington is comfortable with what they're going to do. Now, I will make some small gestures toward the north at the end of this. I think there's a good possibility that, for example, interest sections will be opened in Seoul and Pyongyang. I think there's a possibility that something will begin to happen with Kaesong. But I would think any of those moves have already been worked with the White House, so that the White House is comfortable with whatever gestures Moon decides to put up on the table at this summit.
And family reunions,
Family, of course.
That's a big piece, too,
It's a huge piece for the South Korean people.
Final question. The U.S. having a team in place, Mike Pompeo, we saw him getting on the plane going to Brussels.
Right.
There's word that Admiral Harris is going to be the ambassador to the ROK. There hasn't been one. Because you've been there, you know, you've got to have your players in place, especially, it's a very short window to put something together for Trump and Kim Jong-un to actually sit down and talk to one another.
Absolutely, and I'm very glad to see that the Senate decided to confirm Mike Pompeo for the position, because you need a Secretary of State, you need sort of the captain of the football team, if you will, on the field, and had that not occurred before the Trump-Kim meeting, I think it would have been very hard to orchestrate. That's a good move. Harris, very, very competent man, tremendous amount of experience on this topic, is a good choice that can move quickly through the nomination and the process on the floor of the Senate. And let's get our team out on the field, because we need it.
Dennis Wilder, thanks so much for coming in and visiting with us. Certainly appreciate it. Love your insights.
Great. And
we'll head it back to Zhang in Beijing.
Will the end be just as impressive as the beginning? We'll keep watching from Beijing. Mike, thank you so much. And let's get you up to speed of where things are. The two leaders have now met. They have participated in that welcoming ceremony, all that pomp, and in the Panmunjom border village. They have now headed inside the Peace House, getting ready for that official meeting, which will take place about 20 minutes from now. And our Shane Hom is live for us at the press center. Shane, looks like we won't have live pictures of the meeting itself. The two leaders are now inside the Peace House.
That's correct. And just to describe the scene here at the press center, thousands of journalists have signed up to cover this event, and the press center has been set up here just a little bit away from the border at the Kintex Convention Center. And just to describe this historic scene as seen from the press center when DPRK leader Kim Jong-un first emerged from Panmunjom on the DPRK side at Panmunjom, there was a collective gasp here from the journalists, and when that historic moment came, when he walked over the military demarcation line, Moon Jae-in, and with that handshake, there was an applause. And I know, I'm sure you well know that to get a reaction like that from journalists, it truly was an historic moment. And like you said, this was very choreographed. Obviously, there was a lot of rehearsals beforehand in the past couple of days, but it seemed like there was a bit of improvisation as well. And after Kim Jong-un, the DPRK leader, crossed over, he suggested to President Moon to step back over onto the DPRK side, where another couple of pictures were taken. As well, there was group photos from the delegation on both sides, something that possibly. So, and if you look at the expressions of the two leaders, they seemed very lighthearted. There were smiles and good conversations going on, it seemed like. So we'll wait to see if this hour at 10:30 a.m. here local time in South Korea.
I think it's a consensus that things are really off to a good start. Our Shane Ham on the phone for us from the press center. Thank you. Let's also go to our correspondent Terrence to meeting. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe saying he's increasingly worried.
There's a strong Japanese media interest as well. And as for the Japanese public, it is true that many Japanese are skeptic because past talks and agreements have not been honored, but South Korea has a common regional security concerns and has a common and knows the Japanese concerns as well, and there's been recent talks between Japan and South Korea on working level. But some are worried about President Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un meeting. Both are unpredictable, and will they address issues thoroughly? And Shinzo Abe is also worried that the negotiations will conclude without Japan addressing its concerns, and DPRK issues is one of the key issues promised to the Japanese public. So Abe does not want to send an image that he's left behind, and Japan has to provide, will be asked to provide aid after conclusion without resolving abduction issues. Is something that Abe does not want. So after the talk progress, Abe will have to wait and look for an opportunity for a bilateral with Kim Jong-un and maintain constant contact with U.S. and South Korea for trilateral security cooperations, which also Japan does not want to be left out of. Back to you.
All right, Terrence Terashima live for us in Tokyo. Terrence, thank you so much. Let me come back to our studio guest, Mr. Teng Jianqun here. It may be a summit between the DPRK and South Korea, but regional powers are watching with a keen interest. We are talking about Japan, we are talking about China, and we're talking about the United States. And it's not just because there's that proposed summit between Kim Jong-un and President Donald Trump that could happen later in May or in early June, but because the United States wants to see, is Pyongyang serious this time around? Because there have been those last two summits that didn't really pan out. What would the United States want to see come out of the summit today?
Yeah, you're right. I think different countries related both have their own interest in this summit or in this arrangement for the peace and stability in Korean Peninsula. And I think the United States, of course, has been a key player in Korean issue related to the security, to the nuclear program in DPRK. And I think if we look at history, for example, in 2007, there were two summits between the two Koreans, but suddenly after the for example, the military or some other excuse given by the United States, the momentum at that time suddenly stopped. And this time, I'm not sure the United States can give 100% support to the two countries to go ahead. And because this is actually a geopolitical competition.
Mr. Chen, I'm sorry to interrupt there. I want to get this update to our viewers. We are getting information that when Kim Jong-un wrote in that guest book, he wrote, "New history starts right now."
Yeah.
That's a very strong message.
Yeah, this is a new history. Actually, after the summit, I think the two leaders from the two Koreans, they have made the great history in Korean Peninsula or in the region. And I
want to go back to the live pictures there. Again, the two leaders shaking hands, supposedly inside the Peace House, getting ready for that crucial meeting, the highlight of the day. We know there will be 2 rounds of meetings, one in the morning and one in the afternoon.
Yeah, they talk about the painting in actually the mountain they share together. I mean, the two Koreans share the same mountain, you know. They talking about the mountain. Yeah.
The painting.
Yeah, the painting.
Yeah, the painting of the mountain, hands on the wall inside the Peace House. Another very symbolic gesture to, make this meeting a success and to make, of course, Kim Jong-un feel welcome now that he is on South Korea. And a lot of symbolic things there inside the Peace House. We do know that the oval table sitting in the middle of the room measures 2,018 millimeters.
Yeah.
The two leaders are sitting down. Let's hear if.
Yeah. So I think the atmosphere so far has been so relaxed.
제가 어떤 마음가짐 가지고 이 200m 거리나 되는 짧은 거리를 오면서 아까 말씀드렸지만 정말 이자 분리선을 넘은 거니까 그 분리선도 사람이 넘기 힘든 높이로 막힌 것도 아니고 너무나 쉽게 넘어온 그 분리선을 넘어서 여기까지 역사적인 이 자리까지 11년이 걸렸는데 오늘 걸어오면서 보니까 왜
historical moment. We have spent 11 years to come to this meeting. It's such a short distance, but it took us so long to take this step. On this day of historical significance, a lot of people are giving very high expectations on today's meeting. If we could reach some agreement or declaration, and if we don't put them into practice, then it doesn't make any sense. In the future, we will have to take a very good mindset. We have to take back the 11 years that we have wasted. We have to meet each other often. We have to solve problems and put our hearts together. Only by doing so can we take back the 11 years that we have wasted. It is with such a heart that I'm paying this visit. I have this on my mind when I took the step here, peace and prosperity. That's very important. Today marks a beginning of a new historical era. It is on this starting point that we are forging ahead together, and we have conveyed a clear signal of marching ahead together. The topics that we are concerned about today, we can talk them frankly. We hope we can find a very good result and solution. Let's not go back to yesterday, to where we started. We have to have a very good mindset. We have to look into the future. I hope that we can join our hands together and march ahead side by side. And we also need to convey this signal to all the people who are with us here today. And everybody is discussing what we're going to eat in the banquet. So we have prepared some cooked noodle from Pyongyang. I hope, Mr. President, you can enjoy. I hope President Moon Jae-in can have a taste of the delicious cooked noodle from Pyongyang. And also I hope that our discussion today can be conducted in a friendly and frank manner, and I hope that we can reach some positive results. I hope that we can reach a very positive agreement. And this is what I want to say to President Moon Jae-in and also to other journalists. Our meeting today It's blessed also by the good weather. It's such a sunny weather today, and the world is watching us. All the ears are listening to us. All the eyes are on the summit today. And all the Korean compatriots overseas, they are looking at this summit. So we too, we are shouldering a great burden on our shoulders. President Kim Jong-un has become the first North Korea president that has stepped foot on a Korean soil in the south. The whole world is giving us too much expectation on today's summit. Again, all people in the whole world will be presented a very good gift. We're going to spend the whole day discussing a lot of issues, and it's been our first meeting since 11 years.
Meeting room in the Peace House. We were talking about how much symbolism there is in the room. I was saying the actual year of 2018, when all of this has been made possible, of course, with joint efforts from both sides. And you were saying that the wall depicts of the, which is another very important symbol, common symbol for people on both sides. And Kim Jong was the first to speak. He spoke longer. Moon Jae-in spoke shorter, and Kim spoke of hopes for the future, and they should meet more often, solve the problems together, put their hearts together. He talked about peace and prosperity, not having to go back to yesterday. He even worked talking about bringing cold noodles all the way from Pyongyang for that banquet, which is slated later today. Delicious cold noodles. And then Moon Jae-in spoke, saying that Kim was the first DPRK leader to cross into South Korean territory, and that he expressed his gratitude to colleagues on both sides. What do you make of those remarks?
Both leaders addressed three aspects of the summit. The first is just a historic moment for the two countries, for the region, even for the world. Everybody is watching what happened in Korean Peninsula at this moment. They also addressed the common, interests in this area. For example, the cold noodle you mentioned just now. They share the same food, and this is a consensus. This is a commonality between the two sides, and they also addressed the future for the two sides and for the region. So I'm sure they already got some, fruit achievements. First, consensus for the coming summit, for the meeting, the detailed meeting, and second, they would like to have some cooperative. And I think most important, they all have been in a relaxed mood to have exchanges of ideas.
When they get down to business, when that meeting officially starts, about 5 minutes from side understands that concept, because they might want different levels of denuclearization. We heard from our correspondent Jack Barton there that the DPRK might want to keep its nukes, and that will be a tough issue for them to talk about. Tell us about how they will approach these issues.
I think the two sides have already got a consensus on the denuclearization. According to my understanding, I talked to some officials and scholars from ROK, and they all said the DPRK would like to have a step-by-step process to the denuclearization of the country. And Moon Jae-in also would like to have such a step step-by-step process, because denuclearization is not so easy for any country at this moment. Even Iran nuclear deal, after rounds of negotiations, dialogue, and compromise. So this is a very, very tough job for any country at this moment. But I think the first step taken by DPRK, the suspension or discontinuation of the tests of nuclear bomb and the intercontinental ballistic missile, just gave a very positive signal to the outside world. This should be, accepted by the United States and ROK. So I think this is actually a step-by-step process for DPRK to denuclearize its bomb.
Mr. Hung, I have so much more to talk with you today. Thank you so much for coming in. I want to check in with our Shane Hom at the press center. Shane, we did get a glimpse of the meeting room, the table, the painting on the wall, the two leaders exchanging remarks right before the meeting kicks off.
That's exactly correct. And listening into that brief conversation that the two leaders had, it was truly remarkable, and everything that's happened so far this morning, truly historic. We had a chance to see and listen to the two leaders speak very candidly, and you had that expert there mentioned a moment ago. One topic that the DPRK leader spoke about was this focus and this attention on what's being served for dinner tonight when the two leaders have that dinner at Panmunjom. And he referred to these cold noodles. You're correct, the Koreans do share a common culture that includes food, and I don't think whether from the South or from the DPRK, this remains constant for all. And so leaders again speaking very candidly, and the hope is, of course, that this continues throughout the day, because this is going to be an all-day affair. There's a morning session scheduled, which begins shortly, like you mentioned. They'll break briefly for lunch. There's a tree planting ceremony where more symbolism and more historic moments will be made with the tree planted, a tree that was actually born in 1953 when the Korean War ended, and it will be watered by water from both Mount Halla and Mount Paektu, the tallest mountains on each side of the demilitarized zone. And then following that would be an afternoon session, and then possibly that joint declaration. And that's what everyone will be focused on. And anyone that says that this declaration is a done deal, that couldn't be further from the truth, because that's exactly what these two leaders will be discussing all day.
Shane, everything so far has pointed to a great start. Will it be a great end? I think that's the question on everyone's mind right now. Our Shane Hom in the press center for us. Shane, thank you. I want to go back to our studio guest, Mr. Teng Jianqun here. What could be a good outcome today? We're talking about a document being signed. We're talking about a possible joint statement. Will there be an agreement?
Yeah, I'm sure there should be an agreement or communique by the two sides after the summit. And I'm not sure what will be specified in the document, but I think there should be some agreement to go ahead, to maintain the momentum, to have dialogue, to have exchanges between the two sides and among parties concerned. This is a very important occasion for all the parties concerned to think about the way. You mentioned just now the United States at this moment gave very positive response to the summit by Trump's administration. But in the history, the United States changed their mind sometime and made this issue very complicated. Why? Because the United States has its own specific interest in this region. A little bit tension to some extent, some time might give the United States an excuse to position its military forces and to consolidate its military alliance with the ROK, with Japan. So this is actually a geopolitical competition among parties, because this is not a technical issue. We should have a broad vision toward each other, and we should have patience to deal with such a tough issue.
We should point out that despite the good momentum and the good rapprochement between the two sides, the two sides are technically still at war because the 1950 to 53 Korea War never really officially ended. It was halted with the signing of an armistice. And Mr. Moon Jae-in of South Korea has been advocating for dialogue with Pyongyang, and he has expressed hopes that a peace treaty could replace that armistice. Will that be easy?
No, I don't think that easy for the two Koreans to have such a treaty. They can, have a treaty between the two sides, but I think the peace treaty should include not only the two Koreans but also China, the United States, and as for the United States, it should be very hard for Trump administration because any treaty should get the ratification from the U.S. Congress. I don't think at this moment even the Republicans, takes the majority of the Congress, they can give the green light to such a treaty because some conservative politicians in the United States do not like the ease of tension in the Korean Peninsula, and they would like to have the dominance in the development of the situation in that region. So I think there are obstacles on the way to have such a peace treaty.
Mr. Teng, I want to thank all of your insight today. It's absolutely a pleasure to have you on our show today. And let me hand things over to Mike in Washington, D.C., who continues our special coverage of the Inter-Korean Summit. Mike?
Thanks so much, Jong. Chinese President Xi Jinping is awaiting a distinguished guest as well in central China's Wuhan city. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi arriving soon. It's only a two-day informal meeting between Xi and Modi, but the leaders of the two Asian giants will have a lot to discuss. CGTN Su Yuting has more from Wuhan.
China and India, the world's two biggest developing countries and emerging markets, each with a population of more than 1 billion people. And they're looking to build their mutual trust and reach consensus. Many said Xi and Modi will conduct discussions on major changes in the international landscape that have not been seen in the past 100 years. The informal summit in Wuhan is seen as the perfect mechanism for such brainstorming.
Actually, Wuhan, China, is located at the bank of the Yangtze River, which is a civilization place. Through these informal dialogues, China will be able to provide a holistic view of China for Indian friends. They will have a more and more chemistry between them too.
This is just the latest in their many meetings as leaders. In September 2014, during a state visit to India, Modi brought Xi to his home state of Gujarat. The following year, Xi hosted Indian Prime Minister in the ancient city of Xi'an, which is the capital of Xi's home province of Shanxi. Despite these friendly exchanges, differences still exist, but they're both willing to look for ways to narrow them. During a press conference ahead of the Wuhan meeting, asked whether last year's border dispute could figure in their talks, Chinese Foreign Ministry said the two sides needed to create conditions and trust to resolve the boundary issues. One expert said the recent momentum in bilateral relations guidance of the leaders, but they need to continue to take advantage of the opportunities to open up new prospects in China-India cooperation.
Between China and India, there are some disagreements. For example, the boundary questions. When we talk about the disagreements, we can understand that every country will have disagreements. They are manageable, and I think both two big countries will have the wisdom to handle with it.
Joining me now is Sherm Gupta. Speaking about China-India relations. In the past, though, it's about their tensions, the border dispute. Talk to me about how important this is to see these two leaders coming together and kind of having a nice informal dialogue.
The format also is so interesting that it's been happening so informally, and the meeting is very important. India and China have been able to their parts of difficult that towards that part of last year, but what they're really trying to do now is kind of tease out how they can